Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today. You're here at Anti-Racist Teaching, Committing to Anti-Racist Schools. And this is number 3 of 3 webinars that are brought to you by the California Department of Education, which funds our project, the State Performance Plan Technical Assistance Project, or SPP-TAP. My name is Connie Silva and I'm the director of the project, and welcome all of you for joining us again for this third of number 3. I'm just going to take a couple minutes to talk about how we're going to interact today. Hopefully those of you that are here with us were also at the other 2, but as a reminder, we're going to ask you to be using chat pretty regularly. So you'll want to make sure that you have your blue little box clicked to everyone so that everyone can see your message and we can all know how you're participating. You'll also be having, I believe there's a poll in here. It's just Zoom poll. So when we ask you to participate in that poll, please do. Again, it'll be easy just on Zoom. And then you might want a piece of paper and some pencil. There's a little bit of self-reflection work that's going to be happening today. So sometimes that can make it easier for you to sort of jot down what's going on for you and then sharing back in chat whatever you're comfortable sharing based on the questions. So as a reminder, all of our SPP-TAP webinars are recorded. We archive them so that you can in the future revisit if there's a portion you would like to review or see the whole thing again. And also that way you can share it with your colleagues, which we know happens often. And again, this is number 3 of 3 different webinars. If you didn't have the opportunity to watch the 2 that happened before this, it's another reason why the recordings are important. Definitely encourage you to go back and review or rewatch the other 1 or 2 that you missed. You'll notice that the information really scaffolds one on the other. Doesn't mean you won't enjoy today and get something out of it, but it will all come together much better if you're able to view all 3. So I'm going to move us on to the introduction of our presenter. And again, this is Dr. Gregory Peters, who did number 1 and number 2. So I have a very briefer, just, again, because those of you who have been here have heard me tell you what an incredible person Dr. Gregory Peters is and some of his background information. So just briefly, Dr. Gregory Peters is a school reform leader with a long-standing history working with both local and national efforts. And he was previously the principal at San Francisco's Leadership High School. In 2005, Gregory established the San Francisco Coalition of Essential Small Schools, which is committed to interrupt and transform current and systemic educational inequities to ensure all students have access to personalized, equitable, and high-performing schools that believe and demonstrate each student can, should, and will succeed. And towards this mission, Gregory facilitates equity-focused educational transformation throughout the nation. And he's recognized as an expert in curriculum and school design, data-based inquiry, and equity-centered professional development. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Gregory. Thank you again so much for being here. And let's hear all the wisdom you have to share with us today.
Thank you so much. Thanks again for the introduction. Thank you all for being here. And as always, I would like to start with the land acknowledgement that I personally am sitting in Oakland and therefore occupy the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Ohlone peoples before Spanish colonization. And in offering this land acknowledgement, I wish to affirm indigenous sovereignty, history, and experiences. Thank you for that. Excuse me. We're going to, as mentioned, this is the 3rd of 3 webinars. Thank you again for all of you that have been on this journey with us. Wanted to do a very brief reminder of what we've accomplished in the first 2 webinars. And in that time, we were hoping to establish some common foundation of our understandings. And as a result, some of the work that we did was to learn definitions of keywords and phrases that were related to racism. We also worked to gain a shared understanding of racism's history in public education in the United States. And finally, we explored the meaning of critical race theory and connected the tenets of critical race theory to the larger picture of anti-racism and educator practice. When I said in the, we calibrated some of the terms, I wanted to just again surface some of those nuances. And if these are words that you find yourself also struggling with distinguishing in your practice, a reminder that these are on those tapes. But we interrogated the relationship, first of all, conceptually between that of schools as a design and the concept of education as a liberation practice. Additionally, we surfaced some of the historic but also recurring patterns of achievement that are sadly predictable, and the disproportionality being predictable of success and failure based on student demographic indicators rather, or student identity rather than on student actual performance. And we also unpacked this concept of decentering whiteness, that in fact, to decenter whiteness as a cultural norm or standard, it does require us to actually make the invisible visible. And so we took up the concepts of white spaces and the counterwork of white spaces, which is not, again, part of that nuance piece was not to equate white spaces and white dominant culture with each and every white person as their identity per se, but it really unpacked the nuance of how white people benefit from that culture, but how what we're really talking about is a systemic issue that we're trying to unpack collectively across identity. And when we talk about this idea of language, we took some time to really unpack the nuances between race, racism, racist, racists, and the fact that depending on which word we're using, we could be communicating very different things. And we did the same for some other language as well. And that included the concepts of implicit bias and microaggressions, unpacking and lifting up the idea that these are not necessarily implicit, or do they feel micro to all folks. And we unpacked all the gradations and nuances between dominant culture, whiteness, white culture, white supremacy culture as concepts needing to be, again, explored and understood and interrogated as part of decentering whiteness. Thank you for that slide and all the language that we revisited there. When we went on to webinar 2, our focus was on critical race theory. We shared the definition and helped make meaning of critical race theory, as well as its core tenets, and the idea that critical race theory is a tool by which we explore and challenge the prevalence of systemic racism and racial inequality in society. That we also highlighted some examples from schools and school design in order to show examples that we could use critical race theory as a way of interrogating. And we finally saw snippets of a video where some colleagues came together and had a protocol or a structured dialogue in which they used the tenets of critical race theory as a way of reflecting on a potential policy. And this one was related to student code of conduct as a way of showing how critical race theory is in fact a tool that we can use to help focus our conversations and our interrogations of our work. As a reminder, there were 5 tenets that we explored under critical race theory: the centrality of racism in society, the idea of challenging dominant ideology or white supremacy, the notion of prioritizing experiential knowledge and voices of our BIPOC community, the intersectionality and commitment to social justice, and how it's important for us to recognize how this is systemic and how it plays in. But also the final one was the idea of interest convergence, or the notion that fighting for anti-racism is in and of itself is a benefit to all people across races. When we asked for your feedback, the feedback from a range of the webinar being not useful to highly useful was split right down the middle as quite useful and highly useful. That made me happy, not because it felt good for to get that, but it felt important that people who attended the webinar got something from it. And one person, in response to the question of what was most beneficial, said, "The close examination of race in America, critical race theory, the challenge to dominant ideology and white supremacy. Dr. Peters shed light on behavioral expectations, intervention systems, grading practices, etc." And hopefully we'll be building on that today, and you'll start to see how this work can actually be systematized. So for today, we had sent out some homework for folks. I want to be really clear, this is a This is meant to be unanxious, high expectations. So we know how bananas the world is right now, especially in our schools, especially as we come to a close of the year. So this poll is just to help inform me of how to take up some of the work. So we gave some pre-learning or pre-watching, and based on how much people were able to see, we'll just inform how much time I spend in different pieces. So the poll is simply, did you read? How can we bridge, how we can bridge the culture gap? And did you watch the SFSS explainer video? These are both precursors or scaffolds to the content we're going to look at today. So go ahead, the poll should be public now. Go ahead and fill out that poll, and we'll look at it together and make a decision of how to hold this space.
About 40% of the participants have responded. We've got about 20 more seconds in the poll. So if folks want to share their experience as far as what they were able to complete, we've got a few more seconds to do that.
Thank you.
Okay, let me share the poll with you.
All right, so a majority of the folks that responded said they were able to read the article, about 80%, and about 60% said they were able to watch the explainer video. Because we will have a lot of content today, if folks either didn't get to read or watch, or even if you did, I really want to encourage you to maintain those links so that if there's things that you want to have deeper understanding or do some reflecting on, those are resources that will help. Thank you all. So as we think about the goals for today, our third and final webinar on this topic, the idea is that we will introduce and hopefully explore a framework of some strategies and conditions needed to commit to being anti-racist schools and anti-racist educators. So we're going to explore this framework and even do a little bit of practice with our with some of the work that it may look or feel like. Great. Thank you, Beatrice. I just saw that the poll didn't give the option of saying you did not. So perhaps the people that didn't answer did not. So thank you very much for that. So it might actually be more folks that did not read it, if I'm reading that correctly. And that's okay. I will hold that, and we're all good. So the essential question that is guiding today's webinar is, how can we interrupt and transform beliefs, practices, and experiences that are harming our students, staff, schools, and systems? And as we hold that question, I'm going to move forward and ask you to think about that. If that's the intent of here, I'm going to share a quote from Carl Jung and ask you all to go to the chat box. And as you think about this quote, maybe just put a few words of what meaning you're making of this quote by Carl Jung that says, if there is anything that we wish to change in the child, we should first examine it and see whether it is not something that could better be changed in ourselves. So put on your philosopher hats, put on your meaning-making hats, and let's jump to the text. Thank you. Right out the door, take responsibility for ourselves, tolerance. Children are a reflection of us and the world. Acceptance. Always look at yourself first. We are teaching children how to live and be in the world, so they are learning what they are seeing. So we're teaching even when we're not formally using a lesson plan, is what I see in that quote. That's powerful. Double check if we are operating from a personal prejudice. Being compassionate. Don't judge others until we look deeply into ourselves. Please continue to throw things into the chat box. Thank you all. We're going to move on. That's really great. Appreciate all those reflections. One of the things that one of the reasons this quote was chosen is, for me, it represents this a larger theory of transformation, which at its simplest has been called inside out work. And when we think about inside out work, what we're talking about is that if we're seeking true and sustained change, the first place that change needs to start is with ourselves. And so that change, our transformation, even as educators, even as citizens, has to start with personal transformation, that we have to look in the mirror and understand what biases are at play, what assumptions are at play. And then, only then, when we've actually truly transformed how we think about and see the world, will we start to see change in our professional practice that is sustainable. Because a lot of times we all know that we can get the latest program of the day, try it, and then say, well, that didn't work. And oftentimes when something's not working, it's not because it may be a bad program. Sometimes it is, but it's not necessarily because it's a bad program. It's sometimes because we are still operating from the same biases or beliefs that then influence how that professional practice even plays out. Even as we work on our professional transformation, and that starts to become internalized and sustained, we then have a responsibility for that transformation to be spread. And as educators, that means that our responsibility and for transformation to be impactful and sustained has to move to what we call transferred transformation, meaning that we now need to empower our students, we now need to support other educators, and we now need to look at the system and ask, how are we spreading this practice of transformation? There's been a lot of work done around saying that we know we need transformation and we know what transformed results look like. Oftentimes in education, when we're talking about transformation, we're usually talking about transformed results for students. There has been less work around how does transformation take place? And that's where this next slide hopefully will start to bring us to some idea of the conditions needed for us to foster and sustain transformation in our school sites and for our own practices. And so what I'm going to be introducing is a conceptual framework for transformation. And in this conceptual framework, there are 4 domains. These 4 domains are describing work that needs to happen and the conditions and support for that work to happen, both in our sites, in our districts, but also for ourselves individually. As we move to the first domain, I want to be really clear. This is a cycle, meaning that in real time, this isn't necessarily always the place where we might be or where we might be starting. But when we're formally introducing this work and beginning this work within our communities, this is the go-to for that I would suggest, which is the work in domain 1 is that of identity and schema awareness. While we will unpack each of these domains in much more detail later on in the webinar, I want to give a brief overview for each of them. And when we talk about identity and schema awareness, this is the idea that we need to do the work and understand how we're showing up and how we're making meaning of the world, but also how our peers are showing up, how our system is set up, and why the meaning that is assigned to those the conditions and the situations around us might be what they are. Once we have a sort of assessment of how we see the world or how we're showing up or how we're set up the way we're set up, we then need to create conditions that allow us to have interruptive or catalytic experiences. We need to have experiences that take us off the track of the status quo. And these interruptive and catalytic experiences are not received naturally. These are not naturally fostered. And so we need to create conditions that allow us to have those and to embrace those and not run away from those experiences. Interrupting an inequity or having a catalytic experience in and of itself will not create transformation. And so one of the third domain of work that we need to create conditions for is that of new meaning making. And we make new meaning. We have, in this framework, we have identified exactly 3 places that must be fostered. And so it's not an option of maybe this one or maybe these 2, but we need to make sure that we're fostering space for reflection and new meaning making alone. Each of us is on our own journey and has our work to do that is different than the person next to us. We also need to do work in affinity. And when we talk about affinity, that means a whole bunch of different things. In an anti-racist school, that means we're in racial-like affinity at times to do that work together, which is healing and mentorship. But affinity also could mean other identifiers, depending on what the data is saying. We need to focus on based on our student experience and our student achievement. And then we do the work alone and in affinity explicitly so we can come together intentionally across difference to begin hearing diverse perspectives of how we understand both the inequities that we're facing, but also the potential solutions or ways to address them. And only when we have new meaning around these inequities can we break from the status quo and move into the fourth domain, where we now are taking bold action or actions that have, again, break out of the mold for the purpose of radical change. And when we talk about radical change, we're really looking at that word radical in the mathematical way, which is we're looking for the root cause analysis, because if we can address our inequities and create systemic change at the root of the dilemmas, then the impact will be great and wide. So thank you. We're going to move on to the, as we move on to the next slide, this is a time where you might actually, if you have printed out or have access to the folder, pull out some of the documents, because there's a worksheet that is modeled after this slide that you may wish to use in these next few pieces, or you could just use some scrap paper if you'd like as well. The worksheet looks like this, and we're basically going to be asking you to think about, when have you experienced a transformation, and how might that experience of a transformation map against these stages? And it won't be linear. It won't be, oh, this happened for 5 minutes, then this happened the next day. And then that oftentimes we're fluctuating between domains of work. Oftentimes it's organic, things could be happening simultaneously. But for oversimplification purposes, if you think of a transformation, how might you distill some key pieces that align with some of these domains to help you internalize and understand the importance of creating conditions for these different domains? What we're going to do right now is I'm going to walk through an example, and I'm going to tell you a story. And as I tell you the story, I'm hoping you will be able to see how my story plays out against these domains. It's a real story. It's really from my practice in my life. I want to be really clear. I've cleaned up the story so it seems so nice and smooth, but one would easily be able to imagine how messy it was in real time. So I just want to put that caveat out there. So as we move to the next slide, I know that there'll be some language there to help you. My story is about my relationship with Black female students when I was in the classroom, and then when I was an administrator. When I was in the classroom, one of my jobs was working here in the Bay Area at a high school that truly struggled with its Black students. It had a smaller Black population than other demographic indicators or racial indicators. And even so, still had a very, very hard time demonstrating success for its Black students. In my math class, I had a somewhat unique experience where I had really good relationships with my Black female students. I didn't give it a lot of thought then. I had not been further in my journey as far in my journey as I should have been. In fact, I just assumed this was just because of who I was, how I taught, that it just was a happenstance, a good happenstance, that part of the way that played out was that I had a good relationship with Black students, or Black female students specifically. So like I said, I never gave it much thought. It just became part of my identity. I saw myself as, oh, for whatever reason, this is a connection I can make, whether it be about how I grew up or whatnot. I didn't give it a lot of thought. And then I moved on to become an administrator and then a principal at a different school, a small school, a high school of 400 students. And almost immediately, my relationship with my Black female students shifted. And my Black female students and I had more conflicts than collaborations. And I assumed it was because of my role, which I then erroneously said, well, this is because of them. I made it my Black female students issue that they had, based on history or whatnot, there was just some conflict that I was the face of because I was now in a position of authority, or the position of authority as a principal. There's so much wrong with that stance. There's so much wrong with how I made meaning of that, but that was that was an honest self-assessment in hindsight. And then one day I got a phone call saying that a student was being sent to my office. As it was my practice, I asked if the council would send up the student's attendance record, grades, any discipline file that might have existed, etc. And I tried to do this, I thought, because I was trying to be objective and make sure that I was looking at data beyond just the incident. And when I said that, and this was of a Black female student, a senior that was being sent to my office, the counselor said to me, "So Greg, you don't know this student, do you?" Again, this was a small school. I actually knew all the students, but I didn't get her question. I was like, "Of course I know the student. Why do you say that?" She said, "Greg, this is our valedictorian. She doesn't have an attendance record. She doesn't have a discipline file." And the fact that this student was anonymous to me, meaning her actual success was anonymous to me, it hit me in the gut. And for the first time, I realized that my relationship with Black female students wasn't about them. It was about me and my identity, and the fact that I clearly carried bias with me, that I was not giving myself, I wasn't allowing myself to explore and interrogate because I was resting on my laurels of my positive relationships in my classroom. So I didn't know what to do with that. That, like I said, that sort of opened up my eyes, but I didn't know what to do with it. And so what I did know was that I had some work to do. I had to do some reflecting. I do a lot of reflective writing. This became the focus of my reflective writing. It became the focus of some of my own reading, so I could hear other perspectives that I maybe wasn't open to before. I also went to my own people, my affinity group, and I went to my white colleagues to say, and I went to them specifically because I didn't want to put the work on others, that it was my work. And so I made this very vulnerable challenge transparent. And I said, I need you to know that this is something that I clearly need to do some work around, and I'm asking for support around that. And when we came back across difference, I made that work transparent and asked people to really hold me accountable. And so the bold action for radical change occurred when I created conditions and reinforced that even as the principal, I wanted people to confront me. I wanted people to ask me when there was conflict that included cross-race and cross-gender demographics. I wanted people to automatically say, where is the bias in this? Not wait to see the bias, but actually make it just part of the mantra of doing work with me. And only then, as that happened, again, I'm saying lots of time, very messy, but only then do I feel like after doing that work long enough, did it become a shift to my own stance and my own schema, where now my hope is that whenever I'm in situations, it has become more of an internalized filter to ask myself and assume that in every one of my situations, I am bringing some level of bias that requires interrogation and requires humility. So that's my story. That's one example of a story. I'm hoping that you can see how that played out. I'm also hoping you can see how I'm oversimplifying it into this one cycle, and there were lots of ups and downs during that. So if we could go back to the slide right before, Connie, forgive me, take a moment, and I'm going to ask you to either use your sheet if you have it out, use your scrap paper if you have it out, or if you are courageous enough that you want to share examples with folks, I would love some high level note taking here. Maybe it's just saying, here's an experience where my schema has shifted. Right. And also as a queer man, I identify as a queer man. I hear people in my life all the time saying what allowed them to shift their perspective of how they saw me and my identity. Right. And so it might be something like that. Obviously, I would love if we could focus on anti-racist moments and see if that comes up. But any experience you've had where you believe your schema has shifted, you could just put the topic out there. Or you could start putting some examples of any of the domains, again, not even in order, just as they come to you. So I'm going to ask that we take a couple minutes of reflection time just to start doing that so we can bring ourselves into this framework, and hope that some people will even do that in the chat box. Some folks are putting some really beautiful examples into the chat. Thank you for your courage in doing that. Take a few more moments just to close that, just a few seconds to close that or pause that thought. Again, feel free to continue to add to the chat if you'd like to. We're going to move on to the next slide to go deeper in and unpack some of these, or all of these domains. As we move through the domains, we have some questions that, again, these are just some questions. This isn't the set of questions, but these are some questions to help you connect your own experiences to what we're about to explore and practice together. The first one around domain 1, stance and scheme awareness. Again, this is about the identity work related to our individual, but also our shared history. When in your life has your own awareness or unawareness of self in the skin you are in been keenly influential to you and or your education or your work? The second question, when we move into domain 2, around conditions for interrupting inequities, is where we're developing community as well as shared agreements and practices as part of the, setting those conditions. When have you faced an interruption to your schema, how you see the world or how you see something about the world, and your relationship to it? What allowed for that interruption to happen, and hopefully for you not to run away from it? As we move into the third domain, around making new meaning, alone, in affinity, and across difference, we would ask you to consider, when do you study intentionally on your own? And this is more than, I do reading, recreational reading, but actually, when do you do your anti-racist work intentionally on your own, in affinity, or with allies across difference, in order to help make new meaning of the world and your relationship to it? And finally, in the last domain, when we think about bold actions for radical change and fostering the conditions, the relationships to shift our practices, to shift our results, what is a radical new action that you have ever taken because of a transformation you have experienced? We will surface these questions again, and you also will have these, because I hope these are questions that you sit with for much longer than this webinar. But let's move into the first domain around stance and schema awareness. Again, the question, just to open it up, is, when in your life have you Have your own awareness or unawareness of self in the skin you are in been keenly influential to you and or your education or work? So let's unpack this. We'll start with a quote from a high school student, a high school senior. I actually think that it is true that teachers are taught to judge students when they first see them. Let's say they're Black or something. Some teachers will kind of be with a cautious approach, watching them and how they act. Or some teachers will just judge them and just separate them or something. So when we talk about, as we move to the next slide, when we talk about stance and schema awareness, let's unpack a little bit of the details behind that, okay? The first thing is, again, this is work about our identity. It's also work about our cultural competence. It's really important when we start to introduce this notion of cultural competence that we ask people to suspend some of the patterns of our system. And that pattern has put us in a place where we have somehow systematized making cultural differences the same as barriers. And I think that's a shortcut of recognizing that when some of our students across difference aren't achieving at the same place, we sometimes internalize that therefore students are showing up with barriers based on their identity. And we really want to flip the script. Cultural differences are strengths. They're not barriers. What's happening is that because of our biases, cultural differences are the impetus for us and for our systems to put up barriers. So the barriers that are showing up from us. We are putting these barriers up systemically, organizationally, and oftentimes even individually. So we really want to make sure that we're not sort of creating a narrative that says there's something wrong with cultural difference, because it is in cultural difference that we will find the strength to be able to rethink our inequities. This work around stance and schema awareness, even though we're trying to understand our history, is actually constant and continuous. I'm still, to this day, making new meaning of who I am in the skin I'm in and my identity. Even though I've done the work, I'm never done making that meaning and how it plays out in the world. And different scenarios will change how I even make that meaning. 5 years ago, I'm grateful and was blessed that my partner and I were able to adopt, and I became a dad for the first time in my life. And when I tell you that my entire way of looking at the world has shifted phenomenally, I cannot express enough how much it's evolved, continuing to evolve. So the work is constant and it's continuous. It's also this idea that we have to have both awareness and knowledge. So yes, we need to be looking in the mirror. Yes, we need to be exploring our history. And we have to recognize that our own awareness might also have influences of bias. So we're both understanding and acknowledging and naming who we are in the skin we're in. And at the same time, we're studying what does that mean outside of our own bodies. And finally, for this slide, I believe it's this idea that we are in this, when we're fostering this work around making transparent and doing work around stance and schema awareness, we're thinking about not only our own stance and schema, we're open to hearing about others, and we're collectively exploring what is the stance and schema of our system. Our system has operant theory at play, and so we need to take that up and explore that. Which leads us to the next slide, because when we look at and think about what the work is, part of that work is exploring the operant theory at play. This is what's behind us. So we need to study as a result. And part of that study is about our history, our own individual history, but it's also about the collective history of and it's not just those moments. It's sometimes it's not just like there was a moment when something was complete. It's not summative, but it's also formative, that sometimes we have experiences in our lives that were so influential that we carry them with us. And then, as I mentioned before, we're also studying what is the identity that we have, which our identities are very multifaceted, but also what's the identity of our system? Do we know, can we actually say the identity, give language to what we believe the identity of our schools are? Because when new people come into a community, they see the identity of a community. There's also the current reality, meaning what's in front of us. And that's the part that we need to interrogate. And so we should be constantly, regularly, publicly looking at our data, both quantitative and qualitative data. And we should be exploring and interrogating the actual design and decisions underneath our school. Who does and who does not benefit from our current way of making decisions, our current decisions, and our current design? So what might this look like? What might it feel like? What I'm sharing here is just an example of a very small exercise. And it's really interesting because when we designed this exercise, it really was meant to be a little bit of an icebreaker or a community builder. And we have been struck as to how powerful it has been to create opportunities, again, with this work. What might this work look like? And to create opportunities for people to actually have some agency to name the skin that they're in. And so if this term, the skin you're in, represents those characteristics or experiences that are influencing who you are, how you show up every single day, how might you describe the skin you're in? How might others, especially students in your care, describe the skin you're in? And how do these experiences consciously or unconsciously influence your actions with your students, both those who are like you and those who are unlike you? And so we will ask people, like we'll give a blank gingerbread person, we'll say, so what are your formative experiences? What are your identities? Again, I'm going to share an example, and then I'm going to give some reflection time for you to just do a few for yourself in the chat box. So when we look at my example, I sometimes get a little bit symbolic here. And so I think if we go to the next, if we advance the slide a little bit, you'll see the words to go with this as well. So obviously, not obviously, I identify as male. I want to say that. And I put this on the outside because I know that in this society and in this profession, when I show up, people see a man, and that comes with certain expectations, certain challenges. Certainly, it comes with certain unearned privileges. And so I have to constantly remind myself, ethnically, and yes, I put this near my stomach on purpose, I am Lebanese and Italian. And while I do absolutely love the food, and that's why it's there, it's also how I think about family. It's how I think about culture more explicitly and in shared community than many other variables. I both identify as politically and sexually queer, which does not mean that people can call me that word, right? But it is something I am reclaiming. And I'm married, and people will see that I'm married. That's sort of on my hand, because if people see my traditional wedding band, they'll know that I'm married. But what they might not know is that I've been married 4 times. And why have I been married 4 times? And that's the politically queer piece, because every time someone said we could, we did. I'm also a dad, and I mentioned that, and that has shifted how I look at the world deeply. The last thing I'll say here for this example, even though there's more examples here, and I put this last because, and that is that I am white. And the reason that I put that last is because no matter how I diversify, how do I say this? No matter how diverse I see myself, no matter how many experiences I have that bring a level of awareness to my life or challenge or bias to my life, when I walk in a room in this country, people see white. And that comes with a whole history that even predates me. And I'm still carrying that history. And there's a responsibility that I am always, while I love all of these components about me, my ethnicity, my family, etc., it is not permission for me to escape my responsibility in this country as someone who seeks and strives to be an anti-racist. It does not give me permission to evade or avoid the fact that when I walk in, I am a white man. Now, let's think about, again, that's me sharing my example, right? If I would share this example in a year, you might see different words, you might even hear different reflections. This is constant and continuous work. So let's put the next slide up, which has a blank gingerbread person, and ask you all, think about the complexity of how you identify yourself versus how the world may experience you. And we're going to look for at least a few examples to jump to the chat box. I talked about the complexity for me as a queer man who's been married 4 times, and why that, how people might see me when they see the ring, assume that I'm married, but not know the story underneath it, which is hugely a part of my identity. What are some ways that your formative identity compared to how people see, experience, or what they expect of you? We'll look for a few examples to go into the chat box. And if you're not sharing in the chat box, also still do the reflection for yourself. How would you identify the skin you're in? One person put, I present or quote unquote pass as heterosexual. And I really appreciate that, because again, that comes with expectations of how you are going to respond or engage. Oh, I really appreciate the courage in this. I'm just getting to know the skin I'm in. I will say to the person who wrote that, just reading that feels really beautiful. And so thank you so much for sharing that. That really, that just is a very powerful, transparent sentence. One person wrote, when people learn that I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Mormon, they expect me to be way more politically conservative than I am. That's a really, really great example. Thank you for putting that out there. Again, like, we bring these biases. We see someone, or we hear something about someone, and then our stories fill in the blanks. Yep, I am Black, which comes with stigma. And that's why we're doing this work, is we want those stigmas to be flipped. We want to look at people, and we want people to say, I see brilliance and I see power. Overweight comes with stigma, absolutely. And just to give language to the stigma, sometimes that stigma is shame. Christian comes with stigma. Bisexual female, so I also pass as heterosexual, formerly belonging to a fundamentalist religion, raised that way until I was 16. Yeah, so I love these examples, because it's showing again the complexity of who we are and how we show up, and how we all may be able to find examples of how, as a society, we try to oversimplify who we have in front of us. So thank you all so much. Let's move on to the next slide. In this next slide, we're going to move on to the second domain, or again, the conditions for interrupting inequities. We know we need to interrupt inequities. And the reason this is talking about the conditions is because often if we just do the interruption, we're going to shut things down. And so how do we foster conditions to allow the interruptions to happen, or the catalytic experiences to happen, and for people to stay in it for the transformation? So when have you faced an interruption to your schema, the way you viewed the world and your relationship to it, and what allowed that to happen? Let's move on. Yeah. So as we think about this domain, I want to bring a very powerful quote from Chief Joseph into this domain. If we could go ahead and print. Yeah. Good words will not give my people good health and stop them from dying. Good words will not get my people a home where they can live in peace and take care of themselves. I am tired of the talk that comes to nothing. It makes my heart sick when I remember all the good words and broken promises. So what I appreciate about this quote, and why it relates to this idea of interruption, is we want to break free from good efforts that aren't leading to the results that we want. A lot of us will continue to do the same old, even though it's getting the same old results. And so this is suggesting perhaps it's not just the good words, but about the results, and how are we going to get that? And so what you're hopefully going to hear here is that we can create conditions to interrupt those patterns of inequities and keep people at the table. So let's talk about some of the conditions that we are, and this is, again, not a complete list that you're going to see here, but some of the conditions when we're talking about creating those opportunities for interruption and catalytic experiences. If we could go on to the next graphic, that's great. So the first thing is we need to focus on some personal and organizational commitment. And so part of that work is that we have to invest in developing shared buy-in, community norms or agreements, and calibrated expectations of the work that's necessary. We need to be in schools where we say, this is the work we do. We need to be in communities that say when something inequitable happens or when something racist happens, we need to be able to say out loud, we don't do that here. So being able to create that baseline floor of what is the expectation of being in this community is part of the investment. The next condition is that of practicing equity-centered, anti-racist structures and strategies. So this means in this practice, we're doing this practice so that when it pops up and there's a need in the moment, we have experience of what those spaces look like and feel like. So we can build that muscle by introducing and practicing equity-centered rituals and protocols. You got to see that at the last webinar. You get to see the snippets of the people having that conversation with that structured dialogue. And also the need to constantly be calibrating our language, just like we have done in this webinar. But there's lots of power words out there that we need to also make sure we're understanding, such as accountability or equity or success, because if we're not calibrating that, we frequently will find ourselves talking the same language, but saying different messages. And then finally, when we think about the conditions we need to always be building community and trust. We did not put this first. And the reason we didn't put this first is this is what, I didn't put this in the slide first because folks frequently will know that this is what's needed, but also stop there and think that if all we do is build trust, everything's going to be okay. The work is hard. The work is on the shoulders of the community and trust we're building. So we want to constantly and continuously create opportunities to share stories about our differences and our shared struggles. And we want to constantly, consistently engage in continuous cycles of improvement or cycles of work. And the reason that that's part of the community and trust building is that when we ritualize our anti-racist work, we now realize it's not reactive. This is what we do, as I said, this becomes the practice. It's also important to know, sometimes people will call this work icebreakers or touchy-feely work. There's nothing touchy-feely or ice-breaking only about doing deep community building. This is hard work. And when you hear that language, it's usually people who are pushing away from it because of their own discomfort that may have good reasons for it, but this is not shallow work. This is deep and important work, and it shouldn't be treated as shallow work. We should, like even the prompts we use or the stories we tell should be directly related to our work. So we're going to move on again. And so what's an example of this work, like we did with the gingerbread person? As Chief Joseph suggested, we need a different kind of discourse, and we believe that radical discourse is essential. All of the work that happens in all of the domains of this framework requires us to be in this like deep level of radical discourse. And again, we're looking at the mathematical root of this word radical, where we're talking about root issues. We're looking at root causes behind these inequities. So our daily discourse, when we are not intentional about being anti-racist, will often assume terminology and concepts are coming from some common definitions and experiences, or even feelings, which in and of itself, if we're not taking time to unpack, may create barriers to our efficacy or our capacity to solve problems. What we need to be able to do is create spaces where leadership can support. And leadership is a vague term in this case. I want to be clear. I'm not just talking about the one positional leader. There's leadership, my expectation is that we're developing leadership in everybody over time. But those in leadership must support explicit efforts to model, scaffold, and practice our anti-racist discourse and collaboration. And so we need to say, no, this is a place where this happens, and no better way are people going to trust that that happens to see those holding the expectations, modeling it. And here are some of the ways that we can practice and model it. Again, I know this sounds repetitive a little bit, but it's important. We want to calibrate the essential language, concepts, and context as we modeled in our first webinar, as we tried our first one. We want to have equity-centered discourse and engagement norms as we have practiced or shown through the protocol that we used in our last webinar. And finally, we want to use pedagogies and protocols for equitable engagement. And a stance that I had as a school leader that has served me really well, even and now also in this profession, in my current role, is that any professional development, any professional learning space for educators should model the very practices we hope to see and have demonstrated to be effective for our classes and schools, especially focused on our least reached students. So I'm always thinking about that there's two curriculum going on. There's the what we're doing and there's the how we're doing it. As we think about radical discourse and move to the next slide, there's some language that I'd like to introduce to you. And this comes from some seminal research by Eubanks, Parrish, and Smith. This will be in your folder as well. And they talk about two different types of discourse. And the first one they say is discourse one. This is the typical, the language of schools right now or historically. This is the language that's typically used to talk about, question, and plan the work of schools, change or reform, but it's supporting and maintaining the status quo while also not appearing unresponsive to the demands for improvement. So it looks like we're keeping busy. It looks like we're addressing things, but when we look at the roots of what we're talking about, we're actually just reproducing the path to the same results. While discourse two, they suggest, is language that tends to be about the uncomfortable, unequal, ineffective, and prejudicial conditions and relationships in schools. This opens up space for ambiguity and change to be part of a purposeful structure. This is where we're saying, we haven't known how to do this, so we actually have to be able to talk about this in places where we're going to take risks. Things may work, things may not work, but what we know we're not going to do is the status quo for the sake of improvement. And we're always going to be pushing ourselves for that improvement. A lot of times people will say, yeah, but what does that sound like? So here's just a few examples. And again, in your shared folder, there's a document that has far more examples. But some examples of discourse 1 and 2 are going to be in front of you. So discourse 1 deals with the work of adults. And it sounds like we can't expect every teacher to know every student's culture. That is such a rational thought that somebody might have. That's not a bad thought. Discourse 1 is not about saying things that are wrong, hateful or hurtful. However, this isn't going to lead to change. While discourse 2 deals with the learning and the experiences of students and using a different topic, sounds like, what do our LGBTQ students have to say about how they are experiencing school and us? So it opens it up to the ambiguous, to the constructivist space. Another example, discourse 1 deals with systemic and social reproduction or hegemony, the status quo. It sounds like, look at the parents, the apple does not fall far from the tree. And again, I have heard that, I have said that. And I shouldn't have, but that was where I have been in this trap of thinking I'm looking for these quick answers to justify my own failure. And by justifying my own failure this way, I am limiting the humanity of my students. While discourse 2 deals with interruption and transformation, and sounds like, when a student gets an F, who failed what? Who failed whom? So the idea here is that it's flipping the script on how we're holding that so that we can really get to the root issue and talk about what's really going on. Thank you for that slide. And the last one is discourse 1 deals with how adults talk about student learning and experiences. And it sounds like one student should not stop other students from learning. While discourse 2 deals with how students talk about student learning experiences and sound like, only the Black kids get kicked out of her class. That's because we're loud. But that's because we never get help and we're bored, so we play around. So do you see how these two quotes, these two different ways of talking about a dynamic in a classroom could lead us down radically different paths of intervention, of support, of work? When you look at the chart that's in your folder, I would ask you to reflect at some point, what's the discourse 1 and or discourse 2 that you hear in your own schools or that you fear hearing? Thank you. We're going to move on to the third of our domains, new meaning making. Again, the question is, when do you study and do your anti-racist work intentionally on your own in affinity or with allies across difference in order to help make new meaning of the world and your relationship to it? Again, we'll start with a quote. And so Harini, an assistant principal, says, even as a leader, I have felt isolated as a person of color. It makes me wonder how other people of color without the same authority in my school feel. When we came together in affinity, at first it was healing and cathartic. Wanting our voices to be unapologetically powerful and to be heard, we supported each other to engage authentically and patiently as our school makes meaning of the inequities. We supported each other to come together in solidarity and with love and compassion. So when we talk about this work, it's important to know, again, that this work needs to be fostered. We have minimized the amount of professional development time, and we have minimized what that looks like. And what does it look like when our professional development includes opportunities throughout the year to give the message that we value that you have to do some of this work on your own. We value that you can come together in affinity for the purpose of healing and mentorship, and sometimes just having the conversation that others don't need to hear towards our collective goals. And then intentionally across difference so that we are truly trying to interrupt the status quo and make different meaning of our inequities. The one thing I want to say about the alone work is that this work happens on site as well as on one's own. I have worked in many schools that are really committed to being anti-racist schools. And every year, because we know that there's double-digit turnover in many of our schools across the state and this country, I hear leaders say, well, we can't keep going because we've got new people and now we have to start all over again. And that people are developing plans for their important transformational work or transformation work based on the lowest common denominator. And I think it's important for people to be very clear of what their stance is and what their beginning point is. And when they bring on new community members who aren't there yet, instead of saying, so the whole community is going to start all over again, you have just identified some of that alone work. All right. And again, we talked about this, about the identity of your affinity is at least you want to think about racial identity, but you also want to think about which of your students based on their identities are the least reached students. And those are also opportunities for some of the affinity work. All right, let's move on. I think we can definitely, here's the thing where it says mutually beneficial. This to me relates to the work we did around critical race theory, where one of the tenets was that we had to recognize that this work was beneficial to all of us. And that's a sad reality that that's a necessary step in this, but this is part of what this actually helps us to meet that goal. So then what does it look like when we're doing this work? Susan has graciously agreed to do a shared reading with me. And this is a bit of a poem that was written in response to a focus group with middle school students. These middle school students were experiencing almost immediately when they went to their middle school, a decline of their own self-identity, a decline of their achievement, but most of all, they were experiencing that they were being othered in reality. They weren't saying that, it was in the grades, it was in the referrals, etc. And what came up was that this was problematic because in meeting with all the principals, the schools that these students had come from, their elementary schools, were looking at the names of the students that were seen as having barriers, again, in front of them. And these students were seen as the future presidents by their elementary school principals. These were students were seen and held as utter brilliant children, powerful children, and did not know what happened and why that happened so quickly. And so we met and we did a focus group, and that focus group led to this sort of creative poem that was used to bring to the middle school and to other schools as well to help them get a little perspective around what might be happening for those students. And so so you'll hear two voices. One will be of sort of the author, and the other will be of representing the students. And when you hear me reading the students' voices, those are all in quotes, meaning these were actually literally the words that they used. What we're going to ask you to do is, as you're listening, have your chat open and have some free writing time. What feelings, what thoughts, and or what reactions to the words you're hearing come up? Okay, so we'll do the meaning making afterwards, but just a stream of consciousness, feelings, thoughts, or reactions as you hear the words. All right. So thank you, Susan, for doing this with me. If you want to go ahead and start, that'd be great.
Bad kids. Not one of them. Not one answered because I have to. When asked, why do you come to school? Every one of them said they come to school to learn.
I like to learn and to see my friends. I want to go to college to be a lawyer. I want to play sports. I want to be a doctor. I'm here to learn. I want to get an education.
On the other hand, they could not answer, why were you chosen to be in this room today? The first answer quickly, immediately denounced.
We are the bad kids.
Now I'm squashing quickly the response in hope that it not attach, as each student is thanked for being there, willing to share brilliance, to support their principal, to better support them. Clear that failure lives with adults, not them. Clear that they represent the students not being served as well as the others, because they are students of color. Awkward pause, reading the room, checking if the data is correct. So what does your school think about you, and how do you know?
We are the bad kids, bad kids.
Voices stepping on each other to reinforce that which actually was known to them. They did have a place and a purpose in this room where African-American students gathered for a focus group amongst principals, seeking insight for the only population not being served in a diverse community that seemed able and willing to serve others, but not them. School seemed successful, remarkably successful in educating these middle school scholars who had mastered, internalized the projected curriculum about themselves.
We are the bad kids. We are bad kids. We are bad.
Over and over and over and over, they repeat over and over and over and over.
We are the bad kids. We are bad kids. We are bad.
They repeat as a matter of fact, as a matter of expectation.
We are the bad kids. We are bad kids. We are bad.
Each time
We are the bad kids.
I watch the adults around me,
We are bad kids.
hearts aching
We are bad.
and breaking. And how do you know?
Mr. Jones, my math teacher, wants me out. I just walk in and he asks, is this going to be a good day or a bad day? Do you just want to get out now? And I leave. They don't like me. They don't like anyone. We are bored, so we fool around and don't listen. Even teachers I've never had don't like me. You can tell. One put their hands on me. They hear I'm a bad kid. I was bad last year for playing too much because I felt like it. I didn't want to be in class because it is boring. I got in trouble one time and now it keeps happening. Others don't get in trouble, but we do. We might laugh at others and then we might laugh after others do, and then we get in trouble. I like laughing.
Does race matter?
Hell yes.
All of them, every one of them at once.
Hell yes.
Schools need to be places where every single student hears you're brilliant and is seen as brilliant and has many multiple opportunities to demonstrate brilliance. Who tells you that you are brilliant?
My parents, my family, my sister, my mother. Some teachers do, not many. No, maybe 3. All my teachers are mean to me. I would pay my teachers to be nice to me. Teachers doubt us. Teachers teach us that her 2-year-old is smarter than us. Teachers doubt us. This teacher teaches us that we should go back to India or wherever home is. Teachers doubt us. This teacher teaches us we shouldn't be here because we aren't learning, says we are coming here for nothing. Teachers doubt us. This teacher teaches us to give up on our dreams. You're not going to make it. Teachers doubt us. We don't hear that we are brilliant. Teacher, stop doubting us. Stop underestimating us. Stop being so judgmental. Believe we have potential. So I'm wondering what's in the chat box right now. I know that I wasn't looking at it, but maybe people can also go to it now and think again, maybe just down a quick thought about your feelings or your reactions to this. There aren't any bad kids, but students who are misunderstood. You know, this breaks my heart to the point that I just read, because every time I read this, I choke up because I agree with that. And yet how effectively our system has not only educated, but in this case, re-educated students who are prepared for leadership and power in such a short time. And so when people say, why is this work? Why is anti-racist work? Why is equity work? Why is anti-bias work important? These students always come to mind. That room, that space, that conversation always comes to mind. This is more than just not doing well in a certain class. This is about people's humanity. These children are being failed by adults. I can't think of anything which could be worse. So sad. Wondering who taught them this view. I have witnessed parents say this about their own children. So it's not just the teachers or school staff. Wow, believe we have potential. Bad kids are kids who are judged by adults and staff. All kids deserve liberation and education. Toxic language infecting the minds and souls of our future generations. Appalling, etc. Lots and lots of thoughts. Put those out there, please. So we're going to move on. We're at that final stage, or our final domain. Bold action and radical change, fostering conditions and relationships to shift practices and results. And the question we're asking you to hold is, what radical new action have you ever taken because of a transformation you have experienced? And as always, we'll start with a quote. Malcolm X says, we can't teach what we don't know, and we can't lead where we won't go. And what I love about this quote is it goes right back to the beginning, which said that the work has to start with us. And we have lots of expectations of others, and we have to be willing and courageous enough to practice the work that we wish to see in others ourselves. So when we're talking about radical change, it's important to know that radical change can and often does start with small change. So what I'd like to do is to share with you how much of our of this framework has taken the form of an example of a program. And I say an example of a program, meaning there's many ways of being in this, this framework. And so let's think about how we hold equity-centered learning communities. If we could go ahead and push that forward. So one of the pieces of work that I have been blessed to lead is in supporting the development of equity-centered learning communities that we call I-groups in the organization that I run. And there's some conditions needed to support and foster people to be able to make small changes. So one is we are pushing to interrogate individual work and equity dilemmas. And so this is a space for people to come and literally put their individual equity dilemmas, their student work on the table for critical friendship. We believe that this work needs to and should be happening regularly, and at minimum, we say it should be happening monthly, every month for 2 contiguous hours. Not everybody has 2 contiguous hours every month, and that's okay. It just means that our trajectory, our pacing needs to be adjusted. We can't say that we're going to reach the same goal with 2 hours that we're going to reach, or with 1 hour that we would reach with 2 hours. So we just have to be aware of that. We believe that these should be peer-led spaces so that we're taking out the dilemma of having an evaluator in the room. And I want to be clear, there's a difference between evaluation and judgment. And so we want to create spaces, as Domain 2 talked about, for us to interrupt inequities where judgment becomes an okay part of our professional language. So not judgment of a person, but we need to be able to talk honestly about the work and the impact. And this requires those peer facilitators to actually be trained. They need to be given support and provided with tools and resources that they can feel empowered. And finally, all of this work, while it's individualized, should be feeding a larger communal problem of practice, so that each of our pieces of work that we bring to the table are data points for the larger community effort that is needing to be addressed. So these are just some of the building blocks to creating an intentional, equity-centered, or anti-racist professional learning community. Let's go ahead to the next slide. Now, when we are in these communities, one of the things that we ask, and there's a whole bunch of different ways, again, of holding the space, but we are bringing to this the continuous improvement cycle work that has been demonstrated to really help people stay focused and intentional on gradual and incremental improvement. And so we start by asking people as a result of work we do. So imagine some of the schools we do this with that I work with will have 3-month cycles. And so if a school is saying that its larger problem of practice is that its pedagogy is not engaging across different learning styles, we might say that the problem of practice is going to focus on developing some equity pedagogies, or pedagogies that allow for students to engage across different learning styles. That would be the larger framework, the larger umbrella of the work that we're going to do this year. And so in month 1, we might come together, and in addition to people bringing pieces of work and dilemmas, etc., we might do some professional development around one of these pedagogies, let's say scaffolding, or let's say student discourse, or something like that. And then as a result of the work that someone brought, and as a result of that professional development, everybody commits to a small change cycle. And in this small change cycle, we're asking questions of what is a small change that you can commit to do between now and the next time that we meet. And we're asking everybody to make a commitment, right? That first month, we might define the change. We might say everybody is going to do this following piece of scaffolding within their next unit. And then we ask people to define what that's going to be, and then say, so what do they expect to see as a result of this? What do they hope will be the impact? We ask people then to be very explicit and define, how will they know? What are they going to use to measure that impact? When are they going to measure that impact? How often are they going to measure that impact? And then to complete the cycle, we would then come back the next month. And again, we're going to still be in that 3-month cycle. So then we are going to hear from each other and say, how did it go? And so we'll answer the question. So what did you say you were going to do? And because our practice is a dynamic one, we also want to ask people to reflect, what did you actually do? And why? Why, if any changes happened, were they necessary? And as a result of what you did, what was the impact? How do you know that was the impact? We want to move away from anecdotal only to really looking at artifacts of what those impacts are. And as a result of that impact, what did you learn? And what recommendations do you have? And so we do this sometimes, again, just as an example, for 3 months, going deeper into our knowledge around that pedagogy, but also gradually releasing so that at the end, people are identifying their own change cycles. It goes from it being prescribed to it being self-chosen. All the while, people are bringing student work or dilemmas under this same umbrella to make meaning. And then at the end of 3 months, the community comes together and say, what's the shared learning? And as a result, do we have a new standard of practice that we want to raise? So that is a very, very oversimplified version of what that might look like. And I say it's oversimplified, and it comes with caution. Because if we truly believe that we as a school system are getting the results we were designed for, then we have to expect that if and when we make progress, there will be pushback. Many, many, many within the system, consciously or unconsciously, are counting on the status quo. Sometimes out of fear of change, sometimes out of fear of losing unearned privileges. And so what we know to be true is that there's a desire, and quite frankly, I think that our education profession needs to be re-professionalized. I think we've taken a lot of the professionalism out of our field, and that I think that is devastating to the work. And so we know that part of that professionalism comes with autonomy, The challenge is that we've decoupled autonomy from accountability. And so we have to recognize that we need to build towards that autonomy of action, so that's where some of that bold action, that entrepreneurial action can come from, but we can only rebuild that autonomy when it comes hand in hand with accountability. And so, for example, we know that folks are saying that they want to have some autonomy around collaboration, professional development, etc. And that totally should be a condition that we're building for. And it comes with the accountability of recognizing, therefore, that we have shared responsibilities and shared leadership. It's no longer when there's a mess, it gets pushed off to the administration or the one positional leader, etc. That if something falls apart that we have our fingers on, we are part of the responsibility of holding it through, the solutions. We know that we want to have time and resources that we have a level of autonomy for. And again, that's a condition we should build for. But if we're going to have more control over our downtime, more control over our resources, which I truly believe should be more localized than centralized, needs to come the accountability of a commitment to results. And so that autonomy has to come with success. And then we're also talking about autonomy such as inquiry and data around, we shouldn't just be relying on standardized tests. Totally, again, believe this is something we should be moving for. And if we're going to be doing that, we have to rethink what some of our external partnerships are and how we are assessing and who's holding us accountable and who's part of looking at that data with us. And finally, we want to have more opportunity for our educators and our leaders to be able to take informed risk and failure. We're in a real interesting quagmire right now where folks are afraid to try something new to make things better because they'll get punished, or they'll get a slap on the hand when doing the same thing that's assuring us of failure sometimes isn't getting the attention that it deserves. So we have to actually rethink how we look at support and develop evaluation so that we are pushing for progress. We are pushing again for some of that radical change. And that means that sometimes we are going to not make intentional mistakes, not make egregious mistakes, but sometimes when someone's trying to do something better is not the time to be saying, why isn't it perfect? When what is happening is far from perfect. So this is a complex system to allow us to create conditions for people to take the risks and have that radical change. So I will stop there on that slide, and we're moving now into our close. So and it's really our close, it's the close of our 3 sessions. So as you are thinking about these past 3 sessions, and as you think about your own individual goals and our larger goal to create and foster anti-racist schools and classrooms, what's an example of a bold action or a radical change that you would like to work towards or you would like to take? Again, if we could put that in the chat, I think the transparency and the sharing could be really motivational. As people are putting that in the chat, I will turn to my colleagues. I don't know if there's a minute or two if we want to open it up to maybe 1 or 2 questions, but I'm here.
Yeah, we have a little bit of time. If anyone does want to pose a question in chat, you're welcome to do that.
So Kishan has asked, how do you foster the work when some or a majority of my site do not feel the same way?
I absolutely love that question. A couple things come to mind for me because this is common. This is actually too common. So first of all, I know we talk about domains 1 through 4. When we're working with schools, we'll do some pre-assessment work with them. And one of the things that I really push for is to recognize there's also a domain 0. What happens if people aren't ready, which is what Kishan's question is. And that's where we actually need to do work to create the conditions for people to be ready. And this is where strong leadership is critical, right? And we have to be able to say when this happens, even at the interview process, like when you come to work here, here's the work we're doing, and everybody is going to need support. Everybody is going to have some type of expectation of progress, etc. Even when that happens, there's still sometimes political dynamics that keep things from moving. And there's a variety of ways people have made that that move or worked towards that impact. One of the most effective strategies I have seen is for groups of people to come together and do it anyway. And so in San Francisco, for example, they have professional development hours that they can use, and they've worked with the leaders to say, we want to do this work and we're going to do it during our professional development hours. So we're going to have extended hours once a month to do this work. We're going to send a couple people to get trained, and we're just going to do it. And it's going to be based on who wants to do it. And they strategically come back and brag and celebrate and talk about the change, etc. And then the next year they realize it's 2 or 3 more or 5 or 10 more that say, hey, I think I might want to do that. And at some point they reach and it's a slow pace, but if you're in that if you're in a community that's toxic or resistant to this type of progress, you might have to have that slow pace. And then when they get to a critical minimum, they then can come back and say, this might be we might be ready to say this is the work that the school is going to do moving forward. So sometimes it's a gradual work towards the school-wide work that happens.
Greg, Dana says self-care and reflection is a key component to empathizing when engaging others. If we are not well or reflective, it is difficult to engage at a frequency that is open to understanding and receptive. What are your thoughts?
So Dana, this one hits me a little bit in the heart and in the gut, because I think we're sitting in a situation right now during this pandemic and after all the shelter in place, etc., that I think this is becoming more than an anecdote, and this is becoming a critical component of what's happening right now. The reality, however, is that what everybody is experiencing, or what people are experiencing en masse right now because of COVID, are what some communities have been experiencing for generations and generations. So it's at least bringing light to this is problematic. The reason it hits me so hard is I do not believe as a society or as a system, we have responded in the way we should have. I believe we've moved back to school as usual. I think I heard a whole bunch of people saying we're going to prioritize SEL, and even as a parent, within weeks of hearing that, we were right back to the same old, and it was the same students experiencing some of the same biases, and those biases were on top of generations of biases that came before COVID. So now people were affected by COVID and having to face these biases. So I think, and this, what a way to, let's just call this the beginning of some other webinar. I think that our system is really hurt. I think it's really, really damaged right now. And I'm scared and I'm worried about the wellness of people. So we can, on the micro level, remember with kindness. There's not a person who upsets me when I think about the mantras I have that I don't try to remind myself that in my worst day, I could do worse than the action that just upset me. So I'm trying so hard to really formalize empathy. And that's hard for me. I didn't grow up that way, but that's one thing. But we can do that individually. I don't know what it's going to take, because if the pandemic didn't do it, I don't know what it's going to take, but we need to do that at a macro level right now. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Gregory. That's deep sigh as we think about, as we know, there was a reason why this what was supposed to be one webinar turned into 3. We did recognize that this needed more time, more depth, for everyone to be able to truly grasp the complexity of this and the urgency of this. So we thank you very, very much, Gregory, for being here and being willing to expand this in the way that you did. Wonderful work. I really also want to thank everyone who has joined us for these. And I know there are others that will be watching the recorders after today, recordings after today. We will make sure to send all of you the links to all 3 recordings in case you missed any of them. But again, thank you to everyone who's here, obviously making a commitment to this work, and to Gregory and to my team. So thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And I know that there's going to be impact based on the time that we've spent together. So thank you again.
Thank you all.
And as always, we will be sending a little evaluation note to